congregate in the JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones. You can join the conversation online with the hashtag JFK Junior Forum Live and interact with our student-run Instagram at JFK Junior Forum for behind-the-scenes highlights. Please take your seats now and join me in welcoming our guest and IOP Director Mark Guerin, Rob Watson, and Swathi Srinivasan.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Institute of Politics. Welcome to the Kennedy School. We're thrilled to have all of you here for a really interesting forum here at the JFK Junior Forum with Congressman Joe Kennedy. And so we have a great group of interlocutors with the Congressman from the Institute of Politics that I'm privileged to bring forth to be in conversation with Congressman Kennedy. First, Rob Watson is the mid-career student here at the Kennedy School. He's also the director of student programming at the Institute of Politics. He is a graduate of the college and the ed school. And he was a Peace Corps volunteer. And we should applaud that. A Peace Corps volunteer in Paraguay. Swathi Srinivasan is from Ohio, near Cleveland, Ohio. And she has been very involved in the Institute of Politics, including our policy program, where in her very first year, she worked on a policy proposal that was presented to Congressman Kennedy. So representing the Institute of Politics from various perspectives, we thought they would be great conversants with the Congressman. So we welcome all of you here. We welcome those of you who are thinking about the Kennedy School, those guests from the community. And so now it's my pleasure to bring out our distinguished guest, someone who is known to the university as a graduate of the law school, known to the Institute of Politics. He serves on our senior advisory committee, engaged with our policy work. He has represented the 4th District here in Massachusetts since 2012 in the Congress, and has had a career in public service as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Dominican Republic and as an assistant district attorney. So join me in welcoming Congressman Joe Kennedy. All yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman, for being here. Welcome back. You're back at the house.
Thank you. And before we get going, my mom is here somewhere.
Aww.
I think. If not, she's over. Hi! Thanks for coming. I got a couple cousins here too. Thanks, guys.
Well, Congressman, I had to start by giving you a bienvenido because we just found out backstage that the Congressman served in the Peace Corps in Puerto Plata, in the province where my family is from in the Dominican Republic. So had to give you a shout out there for the people back home.
Muchísimas gracias, señor. Yo le agradezco.
Well, Congressman, I want to get started by talking about public service.
Great.
We're here at the School of Government that bears your family's name, at an institute where you're a member of the Senior Advisory Committee, at a university where you're an alum. From your time with the Peace Corps to working at Harvard Legal Aid Bureau to being an assistant district attorney and now serving in Congress, what's your reflection on public service in this time and its importance as we strive to inspire the next generation to serve?
Dear God, we need more of it. I guess would be the first one. So first off, thanks everybody for coming. Really great to see everybody here. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you, and look forward to turning this into a conversation, I think, as quickly as we can. Look, I think at its best, public service is about problem solving. It's about recognizing the challenges that we as a community, as a society face, and trying to actually find the tools and the means to address them. When it comes to government, the best definition of government I ever heard came from my predecessor, Barney Frank. He said, government is simply the name we give to the things we do together. It's people sitting around a table trying to solve a problem. And I think the divisions that we see across our country right now and around the world, as palpable and tangible as they are, the only way that gets solved is by people rolling up their sleeves and diving into it. And I firmly believe that I had the tremendous opportunity and privilege over the course of the 2018, those midterm elections, to travel across the country, from West Virginia to Indiana to Texas and Arizona and Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, Maine, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Florida, and a whole lot of places in between. And you talk to I've spent the first 6 years in office in a Republican-dominated body where if you want to get anything done, you had to have Republicans not just support it, but champion it. And so looking through the challenges that our country confronts, that their communities confront, and seeing it through their eyes, and I didn't agree with much of it, but to hear their recitation and their dedication to try to serve those communities is really extraordinary. And I think public service is about recognizing, meeting people where they are, understanding that their perceptions and emotions and the way that they see the world are as valid as mine. How do you try to make sure that, how do you build to the chance that you can, or the opportunity where you can actually address those challenges together? And I'll say finally, no experience was more important to me than the time I spent in your mom's hometown. When I was trying to figure out whether to go into the Peace Corps, I actually called Director Guerin and said, "Is this a good idea?" And he said yes, and candidly, he didn't wholly sell me on it after that conversation. But there is not a day that I am in this current position that I do not draw on that experience. And so you are right then, you're right now. I'm glad you suggested it. Thank you.
I had the honor of working with you and your team on a policy proposal to minimize pharmaceutical R&D costs. With 20 of my classmates, we realized the sheer complexity of national-level political change on just such a deep topic. So my question for you is, how do you prioritize and accomplish such a wide range of policies and interventions?
So, one, you literally picked one of the hardest ones out there, so good for you guys. Two, I think you got to take a look at the challenges that our country is confronting. And I think a big part of that is just being as in touch as you possibly can with the communities that you represent, right? Some of the national challenges are going to get framed differently locally. Yes, everybody is getting hit by extremely hard prescription drug costs. What that means, though, and how that manifests can be a bit differently, or can be a bit different, depending on where you are, depending on whether some of the challenges you really have with regards to access to healthcare is a rural community, is an urban community. I've done a lot of work on mental and behavioral health. 55% of the counties across our country do not have a single practicing psychiatrist, psychologist, or social worker. 55%, zero, nothing. And so we've got major challenges with access to mental and behavioral health care here in Massachusetts. That gap isn't one of them, but we still have major challenges. And so when it comes down to looking at something as complex as pharmaceutical costs, trying to do a deep dive and understanding why, which candidly is perhaps the most frustrating part of my job at the moment, because it is actually very hard to get a consensus answer on why. And that's part of, I think, a broken system that we have, our divisive politics and the way in which one of the fallouts from Newt Gingrich's Contract for America and the gutting of congressional budgets, the gutting of nonpartisan research in the institution of Congress, makes it harder for you to get access to and have confidence in pure facts. And when you don't have confidence in those pure facts, you're open up to slant and spin. And so spending a lot of time to try to understand what the actual real answer is, and then try to build a solution around it and then finally, and most importantly on that one, there are enormous forces that don't want that change. Right? It's not a question of, on some of these, of everybody agrees on what the problem is, let's try to find a solution. Many of the big challenges we confront, there's constituencies out there that are actively trying to make sure that change doesn't happen. And so building the coalition that is able to take it on is hard.
Congressman, I want to pivot for a moment to the topic of national service. I know this is a topic that's near and dear to both of our hearts, and there's a lot of talk around national service being a defining civic rite of passage and a cultural expectation in this country. We've seen a lot of the Democratic candidates talk about different ideas to reinvigorate national service. You come from a strong legacy of national service through programs like AmeriCorps and the Peace Corps. What do you think is the future of national service in the United States?
Look, I think one of the challenges, again, that we confront as a country is a nation that oftentimes we don't have those shared experiences. And one of the great aspects of that you hear from my time in office of folks that have served for a while of the shared experiences that particularly military service has provided for folks that come out of different places with very different backgrounds but end up serving in the same unit. And I got a cousin in the back over there who's a combat vet from Afghanistan. Thanks for coming. Chris McKelvey, thanks for coming, bud. Mid-career student. And so conversations with people like Chris that can actually share some of that experience. Peace Corps is also similar. There's some of my closest friends. One of my closest buddies from the Peace Corps is I don't think he's watching, so I'm a crazy conservative Republican that's from Louisiana, now in Texas, and a wonderful guy. Character, a wonderful guy. But it gives you the opportunity to have these experiences and bond over shared experiences that otherwise you wouldn't have. I am a deep believer in the value of national service and the opportunity that national service also provides to take on some of these major entrenched challenges that we face. I think there's some legitimate questions about how you make that work for every American, because there are some details there that are important to balance. But building up that sense of what our country actually is, understanding, giving opportunities to people to believe, to learn that the threads that we share are far more potent and powerful than the differences that we have. 3, understanding that in a democracy, you're actually supposed to have differences. Those differences should be celebrated, not denigrated. But there's a way to do that is not just respectful, but is vibrant, and that you're not looking for unanimity. God forbid we end up in that place. But let's have that discussion, let's have that debate, let's engage in it, and let's be stronger for it. And I think national service can provide that avenue.
Not too long ago, Senator Markey joined the forum on this stage. Some say that your policy ideas are very similar. So my question to you is, why you, and why now?
Great question. So I doubt anybody else had that question in the audience. So let me start big and work our way through it. 1, how much worse does it have to get before you sit there and say, hey, you know what? Go out there and try to run for office. Like literally. When you are in a nation where tonight, 500,000 people are going to go homeless. 37 million people are going to go hungry. A minimum wage job does not allow for a family to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in any neighborhood in our nation. You've got some of the highest rates of maternal mortality in our country, in the developed world, here in the United States, and some of the highest rates of incarceration. I was at an opioid task force meeting in Western Massachusetts 2 weeks ago, and I asked the sheriff who was there, in Massachusetts, they run our county jails, I said, what's the rough percentage of people in your jail tonight that are suffering from mental behavioral illness or addiction? Anybody guess? 30, 80, higher. 90. Off the cuff, he said roughly 90%. The richest and most powerful nation in the world has criminalized illness, and we lock it up. And so, respectfully, how long do you have to be told to wait? I thought our democracy, our participatory system said, you know what, if you've got ideas, if you've got energy, if you want to actually try to change the system, go out there and run. And we don't want to put up barriers to you to do that. We welcome you in. Make the case. Excite people. Bring them in as part of the system. And you know what? You win, great. You lose, fine. Last little story I'll tell you. We'd gone all over the state on Saturday and Sunday when we announced on Monday morning. We went down to an intersection in Boston. Some of you who are from the city will know it, Molnea Cass and Massachusetts Avenue, otherwise known as Mass and Cass. Boston Medical Center, their emergency room's right around the corner. That area has gotten a lot of attention because it is an area that is now has a large homeless population and a large population of folks that are suffering from mental behavioral illness and addiction. As we're waiting to turn the right onto Mass Ave off the freeway, 93 South, it was about 9 a.m., a little before 9 on Monday morning. There's a string of probably 30 or 40 homeless people, and at that intersection, there were 3 or 4 of them that had a spoon, a needle, and a lighter, and were shooting heroin on the corner. We walk into Boston Medical Center, we tour the emergency room, we go across the street to Healthcare for the Homeless, where they've got a facility where they've got a room there where if you've injected out on the street, on that block, you can walk in and make sure that you do not overdose in the lobby. And there's a woman, there's a crowd of people that come out all homeless, and there's a woman that is in tears, and she is pissed. And she is angry, and she has tried, and this is still where she is, and she cannot believe a system that, despite her best efforts, has gotten her here. And she is in tears, and she is just venting. And so one of the journalists that's with, I talked to her for a little while, and I heard a bit about her story as we turned to walk down towards the South End Community Health Center. He says, look, I know you care about these issues, but you could work on these in the House of Representatives. You don't have to run for Senate to be here to work on this. And I said, true and fair, but I've actually been here before. I visited all of these facilities, and not a single camera or reporter showed up. Not one of you. There is value in a campaign. There is value in showing up where people don't, and listening to voices that people don't hear, and enforcing our Commonwealth, our country, to confront the fact that even here, a state with the largest employer is in healthcare. The best medical system anywhere in the world is right here. That we have 98% of people covered, and we still, on one of the biggest intersections in our city, have a string of homeless people that are shooting heroin at 9 in the morning on Monday morning and don't know how to fix the problem. How much worse does it have to get before somebody says, you know what, let's try? And you know what it starts with? And that is a hard problem, but you know where it starts? It starts with just showing up and showing the dignity and humanity that every single one of those folks has. And saying, I'm not going to solve your problem tonight, but I can prove to you over the course of this campaign that your voices will be heard and we will work on this. And that if I can't get this done because of structural barriers in Congress, then we're going to change those structural barriers. And if those structural barriers still hold up, then we will change Congress and we'll get other people elected, and we will not stop until in one of those progressive communities in the richest nations in the world doesn't have somebody outside a major hospital and a healthcare center dedicated to homeless people in tears because the system has let her down. I mean, literally, what? My mom's here.
Congressman.
But seriously. And they tell you not to run. Yeah.
Congressman, you spoke a little bit about structural barriers. We're living in a complicated time right now. We just, last week in the forum, had Professor Gergen and David King here talking about impeachment. What's your take on the current state of affairs in Washington, and what's your read on the current situation with the president?
So, with the caveat that I haven't seen what's happened in the last 10 minutes, so like... So this is a tragedy, and it's painful, and I think I was at an event earlier tonight where people were coming up and kind of grabbing my arm and saying, thank you for, yes, impeachment. Like, I get that frustration, and yes, I believe the President of the United States has committed multiple impeachable offenses and should be removed from office, period. We should not celebrate that. Right? That is, and the fact that our system still allows somebody who, after a 2-year investigation, that a special counsel who was one of the most dedicated public servants in modern American history with this most talented team of investigators and the extraordinary resources that they had, found 5 different occasions where he believes there's substantial evidence to prove that the president obstructed justice. And yet our political system enables him to stay. And yet, I mean, if you can think about it this way, and some of you probably know this, without getting into Mueller, and I think he should have been impeached off of what Mueller found, and I don't even think that's a close call if you actually read it and you know what you're reading, which is part of the problem is that you have to have read 448 pages and you have to know what you're actually reading. But members of Congress should know what they're reading, which is actually a bigger hurdle than you might think. Two, after Director Mueller came up and testified, and the press narrative around that was the president's going to walk, the next day he calls the president of Ukraine. The next day. And what did he do? He asked the head of a foreign government to investigate a political opponent, to aid a political campaign for his own benefit. It is exactly what the Mueller report found. And the day he figured out that he wasn't going to be held accountable for it, he did it again. And then after a whistleblower brings it up, and after some people step forward and the White House starts to stonewall, he does it again in broad daylight to say, if I keep committing this crime, it's actually not a crime. Because I won't be held accountable, and therefore it does not matter. Literally proving what Richard Nixon said. Literally proving what he said. And the difference is that when he said it last time, the scales tilted. And the American public and members of the president's party said, no. And that hasn't happened yet. I respect my colleagues deeply. Their right to sit in those seats in the House and the Senate is just as legitimate as mine. They spoke for their constituencies. They won an election. But every so often in this job, and not all that often, but every so often, you are in those moments where you will be judged. And Congress will be judged. And I have a hard time understanding what that argument on this one is going to be. And when you see an administration that is stonewalling for the sake of poisoning the political well, fine. I get the political strategy. You're also conceding that there's not a substantive defense, because if you thought there was one, you'd disclose the information. And I hope our political process is able to answer the challenge that it's up against.
All right. I think we'll now entertain a question period. Rob, if you want to.
Sure, so we're going to take it to the audience. So we have different microphones around the room. So if people want to form in a line, if you want to ask a question, you can get in one of the lines.
We have 4 microphones stationed across the room, so please use all of them.
I want to really quickly, just as people get to the mic,
Popular guy.
I want to go over quickly House rules. There's a mic up here as well, and right there. So quick House rules. We ask that all of the colleagues here asking questions identify themselves. One brief question. Your questions have to end with a question mark. Please, no media at the microphone, and we'll have at it. We'll have Swathy here pick someone from the crowd.
All right, we'll start from the right.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for being here with us tonight. My name is Abigail Fenley. I'm a first year at the college, and I'm from Hingham, Massachusetts.
Hey, congratulations. Good for you. Welcome.
Thanks. So as you begin to challenge Senator Markey, a co-sponsor of the Green New Deal, for his seat in the Senate, in an election where voter priorities include climate action and plans to transition to fully renewable energy, I was wondering if you could comment on your investment in ExxonMobil, a company that spent more than a decade trying to advance climate change denial worldwide.
Great. So thanks for the question. Thanks for the question. An important one. Couple things. One, I'll put my environmental record in Congress up against anybody's. My record with the League of Conservation Voters, lifetime record, is a 95. I challenge anybody to find a time where I have not voted against any sort of bill that has a strong environmental movement or voted in favor of those economic interests at all. You're not going to find one. Those assets are family assets that have been long held for an awfully long time, well before I was born. I exercise no control of them whatsoever. This is an issue that, for me, is going to impact my life for the rest of it. I've got a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and it's going to impact their lives for the rest of them as well. Congress has to address it. It's one of the big reasons why I, unlike every other person in this race, am for ending the filibuster, because I was and am an original co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. I was on it from day one. I took the Sunrise Pledge too. And if you want to deliver on the promise of what the Green New Deal is, Mitch McConnell ain't going to let you do it. The filibuster itself has been most famously instituted and leveraged to deny civil rights and the civil rights movement access to the Civil Rights Act and to delay implementation and a vote on it. That is prohibiting a climate policy, even if we are able to flip the Senate, is going to prohibit us from passing those, making good on the promise of what the Green New Deal actually constitutes. So if you believe in that sense of urgency, if you believe in everything that you just articulated and that this is the urgent moment that we have, then you're going to have to be for the structural reform that actually gives us the opportunity to do it. I'm the only one in the race that's come out for it. And so I'll put my record up against anything, I'll put my positions up against anything. You're not going to find a stronger advocate for the impact of what this is going to mean for me and my children than me. I appreciate the question.
Hi, Congressman. I'm Matthew. I'm a junior at the college, and I spent 2 summers teaching in the Dominican Republic in Samaná.
Beautiful place, man. Good for you.
Very much so. Thanks. My question actually has to do with the Dominican Republic. I was wondering, what did you find to be your biggest takeaway from your time there with the Peace Corps, and how did you use it to inspire your career in public service?
There's a lot there. The value of sunblock was probably like top of the list. So look, I get it. You get asked all the time if you've been a Peace Corps volunteer, how do you boil down an experience that creates a massive transformation in like 30 seconds? So I'll do my best. But the best story I can tell you, the best way I can share it, is a story that I think many Peace Corps volunteers would have something similar. I was on my way back into Santo Domingo. I visited my host family in Santo Domingo. I was on my way back into the Peace Corps office in a bus that's called a little minivan that's called a guagua, which is a minivan meant for 8 that has like 35 people hanging out of it. And I was in the second to last row, little backpack on my lap, and somebody taps me on the shoulder. And I turn around and it's an older gentleman, and he says, "¿Cómo te vas?" And I was like, "Sí," asking if I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I said, "Sí." "¿Cómo supiste? How did you know?" And he looked at me like, "Really?" Fine, fair enough. And he said that he never asked my name, he never asked where I was from, he didn't ask me no questions. He just said that when he was a little boy, he was living on the outskirts of Santo Domingo in a community that didn't have access to running water. And a Peace Corps volunteer came and built an aqueduct, a water pipe, aqueduct, to bring clean water to that village. He thanked me for the contribution that volunteer had made some 30 years before. And shortly thereafter, the bus stopped, he got off, and I never saw him again. The impact that service has is going to long outlive any contribution that one of us will make. And you will touch people in a way that they might not quite realize at that time. But in a time of division and rancor and frustration and pain all around the world, I can't think of a better solution than showing the world who we are as a nation, what we believe in, than the contribution that gentleman made now 40 plus years ago. And I carry that with me every day because I think, and I want to believe, and I do believe, that doing things the right way for people in need, they know it. And that comes back to the benefit of all of us. And the value of sunblock. But yes.
Hi, my name is Blake. I'm a sophomore here at the college. Just a few minutes ago, you spoke about your desire to abolish the filibuster. Mm-hmm. In our incredibly polarizing times, how do you respond to critics who say that the abolition of the filibuster will only further those divides? and result in more radical changes whenever the Senate's party affiliation or party control flips power?
Two ways. It's a great question. And that was a question I've wrestled with for a while before I decided, hey, you know what? We have to do this. So it's a great question. Two things. One, the current system ain't working so good at the moment. And it is actually calcifying a viewpoint that ends up structurally barring us from making the change that we need on so many levels, whether it's gun violence or voting rights or environment and the Green New Deal or anything else. You add up the number of senators that could prevent progress from going forward, right? If it went a certain way, it's roughly 11%. They represent about 11% of the population. And so I don't think that even, it might not necessarily come down to those certain states, but what we've seeded in the partisan politics, the partisan tit for tat that we're in at the moment, where a small minority of the country can inhibit the progress that the rest of the country is actually screaming for, one. Two, the very first thing I would do, the very first thing, is pass what we did out of the House called H.R. 1, which is a massive structural overhaul to our democracy. Everything from ending gerrymandering to strengthening voter rights, to getting money out of politics, PAC money, public financing, a whole wide variety of reforms that actually makes our democracy stronger and puts our votes and the power back into the hands of people. And if you do that, you're right, there's a risk that the pendulum swings further one way or the other. But I have far more confidence then, if you actually put those structural reforms in place, that the government you get is reflective of the actual will of the people. Because the one you got at the moment isn't. And so, yes, if it so happens that you make our country far more responsive to what people actually want, and Republicans end up winning control, and it has to be unified control, House, Senate, and presidency for that pendulum to swing, right? But if they end up winning unified control, then it means the Democratic Party better do some soul searching and figure out how to win an election. And similarly, if the Democratic Party swings that, Republicans got to do some soul searching. But what I think you've got at the moment, Democratic presidents have won the popular vote for 6 of the last 7 presidential campaigns. 4 of the Supreme Court justices, the conservative justices on the court, have been confirmed by presidents who lost the popular vote. You've got a president that lost the popular vote this time that has set the structure of a federal judiciary for probably as long as you or I, literally as long as I, anyway, might be alive. Because of a calcified structure of the Electoral College that in and of itself is a relic of a racist system. So how long can you sit there and say, you know what? That status quo that is a calcification, is a relic of that calcified system, is in the denial that it provides for folks across our country that need that help. How long are you going to say that's okay? Last piece. It is no surprise that those folks that I talked about a little while ago on the street in Mass and Cass, they don't have nearly as many people coming and knocking on my door in Washington, D.C. as some of the interests that are represented by our current democracy. And so if you believe that everybody here counts, everybody's got the dignity of being a human being, and our country's promise is that we see you and hear you and that we got your back, those structures have to shift. And so yes, it's a concern, but I've got confidence that a Democratic Party, 1, will heed the will of its voters, and 2, if not, then we deserve to lose. But you don't deserve to lose because some structure sits there and says, hey, we tilted the playing field, and we've now rigged the game for 40 years so that you can't win. That ain't democracy.
Hello, Congressman. First off, thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah.
My name is Matthew Kenny. I'm a master's student at the Graduate School of Education.
For you.
Before coming here, I was a teacher at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School following the shooting. And my question for you is, what are your thoughts on mental health services and social emotional learning in schools?
Matthew, thanks for being here. Thank you for being a teacher. Thank you for raising this question. And I've had the opportunity to get to know a number of your, they might not have been your former students, but students at at your school. I'm not sure there is a greater example of failure in our government than what has been exemplified not only by what transpired at Marjory Stoneman Douglas and now so many others, but by the response that those students showed, and by not accepting excuses or pablum from public servants on either side of the aisle by saying, hey, that's great, but you guys are just a kid, right? Or, yeah, that's fine, but we've got a Second Amendment. Yeah, there's a Second Amendment. There's also web regulated in there, and the price of being able to carry a weapon in this country shouldn't be that kids are terrified in schools or shot when they're going to class. When it comes to mental and behavioral health, which is the core of your question, the short answer is there needs to be an awful lot more of it. The longer answer, and this is the longer answer, and so we can go on for a while, I'll cut it short unless folks want me to get into it in a larger overhaul, or a larger way, longer way. Getting back to the point I was making earlier about who has agency in the current democracy, who doesn't, and whose voices are cut out. If you think about those suffering with mental and behavioral illness, there's very few folks that end up coming down to Washington to lobby on their behalf, to speak for their interests. One, many people suffering with mental behavioral illness aren't able to make that journey, either because of their condition or two, because it's expensive. Many of their families devote enormous resources to caring for those individuals rather than, so they don't have the excess funds to engage in that lobbying effort. Three, the stigma associated with mental behavioral illness is still so strong that there's not if I asked every one of you if there's somebody in your family, a loved one that's suffered with cancer, every hand in this room is going to go up. If I asked you if you've got a loved one that suffered with mental behavioral illness, the answer is probably still the same, but not every hand will go up. So you start to peel back the layers on this. I think I mentioned earlier, 55% of the counties in our country don't have a single practicing psychiatrist, psychologist, or social worker. That's not a problem you can solve overnight, but it's emblematic of the fact that our society doesn't value that work for what it's worth. The largest payer of mental behavioral health services in the country is Medicaid. The reimbursement rates for mental behavioral health services are terrible. I asked CMS, the government agency that oversees Medicaid, how much do we reimburse for a mental behavioral health visit in any state? They said, we don't know. I said, how do you not know? Somebody writes a check, you guys write a check, you gotta know. And they said, we don't know. It's a joint federal-state program. We provide funds, states then administer it. Much of the way states administer mental health is through block grants. Is through managed care. Those managed care organizations end up being a bit of a black box. So while a provider will bill for it, that number doesn't translate up to us. And I went, well, can't I write the law that says you have to? And the guy laughed. And he said, you don't get it. This system is so structurally unfunded. There's such a massive debt. And governors can't deficit spend. You're going to confront every governor with a bill that is going to be in the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in an unmet need that they all of a sudden are going to have to meet. And it's going to have to come from something else, healthcare, education, taxes, or transportation, or they're going to raise your taxes, which none of them want to do. File that bill, no way anybody's going to get on it, because the first call that they're going to get is from their governor's office saying, don't get on that bill. So I've been working with some colleagues on a structural overhaul to our mental behavioral health process that is that is big and deep, and that is taking far longer, candidly, than I would have thought or hoped for or expected. But we're working on it, and one of the pillars of that has to be early intervention, making sure that people get access to mental behavioral health workers, identification in schools, fight back against this Republican or this conservative talking point that when you see an episode of mass violence, that all of a sudden, because no sane person can do that, clearly that person is suffering mental behavioral illness. It's wrong. empirically untrue. Not that facts matter for everybody anymore, but empirically untrue. And that we, as a society, do a much better job of reaching out to people suffering with mental behavioral illness and saying, hey, it's okay, because you know what? My family too. And let's get you the treatment that you need. And let's force legislators to actually have to take a position on it and vote on it. But at this point, we haven't gotten there yet. We'll keep fighting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Emily. This is Saya. We are constituents from MA-4. We're also seniors at Brookline High School.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Hey, so you actually came to our high school a while ago to talk to us about how you were working to end the climate crisis and build, unity within the government.
With a couple of Republican colleagues.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was so inspiring to me,
Right. We're still working on that thing with the Republican colleagues.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a little conflicted now because you're running to unseat Ed Markey, who's the co-author of the Green New Deal and has been a consistent climate champion with ambitious solutions for the change we need. And so I'm not sure if that's the message anymore.
And so our question to you, as not, as you just said, not just kids, but as young people fighting for our future, are you putting your political ambitions ahead of our generation's future?
So, respectfully, no. I respect the contribution that Senator Markey has made on this, absolutely. As I said before, you look at my climate record, it's a very, very strong climate record, and I'm proud of that record that I've developed. 2, there are critical issues out there, including the Green New Deal, which, as I said before, you want to pass any of it, you got to be for repealing the filibuster. I am, Senator Markey's not. There's also, you talk about the impact for your future. I agree. I would also remind you that the future for those folks that I talked about on Mass and Cass, their future is literally tomorrow. Literally tomorrow. You're shooting heroin and fentanyl 5 to 10 times a day because the half-life is on fentanyl is half of what it is, less than half of what it is on heroin, so you're taking 5 to 10 injections a day and playing Russian roulette 5 or 10 times. They need a solution, literally, to save their life now. And I believe that Massachusetts deserves a senator that is fully engaged, yes, on climate, and yes, for those folks on Mass and Cass, and yes, on affordable housing, and yes, on domestic violence, and yes, on mental behavioral health care, and yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. And if you can't, then you know what? You better be running around this country trying to flip Congress. I told you I was in nearly 20 states last cycle doing just that. I have raised millions of dollars campaigning for people around this state and around our nation to do just that. And I've articulated to you tonight part of the structural reform, including, by the way, getting dark money out of politics, which not everybody else in this race is for, including ending the filibuster, including ending the Electoral College, including term limits on Supreme Court judges, none of which Senator Markey is for. And so respectfully, yes, I understand the impact of climate. I've got a record that shows it. And you've got a commitment from me saying it is a critically important part to our future. You're also hearing from me there are other people out there that have an equally demanding necessity for major structural change, and that your job as a United States Senator has to be hearing those voices too. Because they've got the same dignity that you and I do, that I share, and that my children share too. And as a senator, you can do that. And I think when it comes to those things, hearing those concerns, elevating them in Washington, delivering on that change and changing politics, yes, respectfully, I think I can do a better job. And I challenge you to look at those policies that I put forward and ask yourself whether, unless all the candidates in this race adjust to those policies, whether any of them can actually deliver on what you say.
Hi, Congressman. I'm Duncan, a freshman from Philadelphia.
What's going on?
Hi.
Eagles fan?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Very briefly, I had the extraordinary honor of campaigning with Mayor, unfortunately, right after that Super Bowl. And I did, he was kind enough to present me with an Eagles hat. I was kind enough to commend him for the courage to grease all of the lampposts with Crisco to make sure that your fans didn't climb lampposts after a Super Bowl win. We've done that so many times here, it's just kind of old hat, but I...
It's a good one. I think you're pretty funny.
Have you voted, registered to vote here yet?
Philadelphia, swing
Aha,
state.
perfect. There we go.
Or Pennsylvania. You spoke earlier on the need to hold the president accountable for his crimes and his abuses of office in the form of impeachment.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about this lately. The one issue I take with that, the idea that we need to hold him accountable, is I find it difficult to see a scenario in which the president is really held accountable in any firm, meaningful manner for what he's done, because even if he is impeached in the House, which is certainly possible, if not probable, I find it difficult to see how he would actually be removed from office in the Senate, because even if all 45 Senate Democrats, as well as both independents, voted to remove him, you'd still need 20 Republican senators to vote the same. And
probably not likely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So my question for you is there any foreseeable future in which Trump is actually held accountable for his actions in any practical, meaningful manner?
Yes. And look, I should say, as of this moment, I share the same concerns that I don't see a pathway to get 20 Republican senators to vote to remove him from office. All of that being said, we've seen a dramatic shift in not just public opinion, but the facts that have changed public opinion in a week. And you've got a White House that is stonewalling because they clearly don't want more information coming out. So I think it is incumbent on us, on our system, I would like to say Democrats and Republicans, and hopefully they will join with us in the system to actually get the information out so that he can be held accountable. I do think that there is value, even if you can't get to 20 in the Senate. I do think there is value, both now and in the viewpoint of history, on the saying that when there was credible evidence that the president committed multiple impeachable offenses, that your system at least tried to hold him accountable, even if it didn't. But at some point, if you believe in our democracy, and I do, as challenged as it is at the moment, one would like to think the political will enable us to actually make these adjustments that are necessary in order to ensure that no one is in fact above the law. And if it means you have to force this system, even if it fails in this moment, if you have to force it to show what that failure is, then far better you do that and fail than to say, you know what, we're not sure we can get the votes, so we're not even going to try. Last point. I understand that from somebody that campaigned in an awful lot of those swing seats. I understand the vulnerability that a number of our colleagues face in casting some of these votes. They won in districts that Donald Trump is still popular in. And I respect that, I respect their opinion. And I believe that Speaker Pelosi has done this right to move this along at the pace that the caucus is at. I also was a prosecutor. And legal analysis is sometimes a complicated thing, sometimes it's not. And volume 2 of the Mueller report is in kind of 3 basic sections. The first one is a very short description of what the law actually is. And in order for somebody to be convicted of a crime, you have to meet the elements of offense. Elements are checklists. If you meet every one of them, prove it beyond the standard of proof, beyond a reasonable doubt, somebody's convicted. You got to hit all the little elements, as they're called. There's 3 elements to obstruction of justice. The second big point, or part, is a recitation of 10 separate instances with the special counsel's investigation, believe that there might have been, obstruction may have been committed. And they apply the facts as they found them to the law. On 5 of them, they say, can't show it. On 5 of them, they say, you might. On a couple of those 5, they don't say you might. The word, I believe it's page 97, the entire legal analysis is on 1 page. 1 page. There's substantial evidence to show 1, substantial evidence to show 2, substantial evidence to show 3. What the special counsel doesn't write was there's substantial evidence to show that he committed a crime. But you heard some of our colleagues actually ask the special counsel during his time on Capitol Hill, does 1 + 1 + 1 = 3? Because that's what he wrote. And yes, it was frustrating to hear him say, I know what you're doing. I don't disagree with your analysis, but I don't necessarily agree with it either. Director, I don't know what that means. These are your words. And so if there's a real issue there, then tell me what the real issue is. But otherwise, I'm quoting your words back to you. And the last part of it, which is the only part that I could say, okay, well, that's what you found. Now there's constitutional defenses that the president could raise because of his office and the special privileges afforded to that office that you could say some of this doesn't work. They take all of the affirmative defenses raised by the president's counsel and dismiss every single one of them. So if you're at that point and you believe that the investigator believes that there's substantial evidence to show that the president obstructed justice off of an investigation into whether the president benefited from foreign interference in an election, which he directly asked for on national television. Like literally, what else are you supposed to do? Say, well, we might beat him in an election, better luck next time? Not for nothing, that's what the Obama administration did. There wasn't evidence that he, at this point, the obstruction at that point, but they looked at it and said, hey, we could go public with it. John Brennan, director of the CIA, at that point, went forward to McConnell and said, Russians interfering in the election. And he said, you go public with this, I'll tell them it's a partisan witch hunt. So they didn't, because my understanding of that, didn't come from them, but my understanding is there was a risk at backlash, and they thought we were going to win. You want to make that gamble twice? Or do you at least show that, you know what, our system matters, and if a president of the United States is going to blatantly violate the law over and over and over again, what else are you supposed to do?
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for being here. My name's Luke. I'm a sophomore at the college. Following Senator Elizabeth Warren's announcement for her candidacy to be the nominee, you were one of the first elected officials to endorse her. So as a fellow supporter of our next president, I'd love to hear why you chose to support her. And if and how she might have reinforced your confidence in her over the past 8 months of the campaign.
It's a great question. I had the honor of introducing her at her announcement up in Lawrence. I would say she hasn't done anything to heighten my confidence in her over the past 8 months because I had an awful lot of confidence in her to begin with. I've had the extraordinary privilege to know Senator Warren for the past decade or so. I met my wife in her class. With all due respect to all of the other teachers here, she was a kick-ass teacher. She was the hardest teacher I ever had, without question. She scared the crap out of everybody. But what was amazing about an experience with her, she was our first year contracts professor. I took bankruptcy law just to get another class with her, not because I was interested at all in bankruptcy, but just because of what that intellectual experience was. And the amazing thing about it, more than anything, and what I see her actually going through at this moment, the kind of unwritten part of the campaign. There's about 80 students in her class. She asked every student a question every single class, and almost every person got the question wrong. It was just brutal. But I still got married out of it, so hooray for, at least that worked out. But what she did was, she put you in your place, but she got you pulling in a place that's not always, altruism isn't the first thing that you think of when you think about a Harvard Law student always. She got her class pulling for the person next to you. And she challenged every student in that class because she actually believed that if pushed, you would be better. And that she wasn't going to let you get away with oh, I'm not going to be on call this week, so you can sit there and, check your email. She didn't allow computers in the room. There were BlackBerries. iPhones didn't exist. It was way long time ago. But she pushed you hard. But she pushed you hard because she believed that you were up for it. And that when you came out on the other end of that class and the other end of that semester, you actually knew something you didn't know going in. And you understood how these pieces fit together. And she knew that if her students were challenged, that they could rise to that occasion. And I see that same impetus in her policy discussions and the way she's running that campaign. She is putting out her interpretation that I think is right about the structural inequities in our society and forcing us to wrestle with them. And say, look, you might have a different idea, but here's my take on it. Debate it. And I've got the confidence enough in my plan to say debate it. And you can ask some questions, but I got answers. But we'll engage in it, because you know what? That's what this is supposed to be about. And I'm going to force you. You're not going to be able to look away. You're not going to be able to escape off of some hey, my dog ate my homework, I'm kind of sick, it's snowy out, whatever else. Ain't going to cut it. But a good faith effort to meet that challenge, that's what this is supposed to be. And I can't think of a more important time than for our country to actually be challenged in that way and to see people answer that and say, yeah, I might not agree with all parts of it, but thank you for believing in a country that actually believes in itself. And I think she's going to make a great president. One last one. Yeah.
Congressman, thank you so much. I'm a longtime constituent, and I actually had the pleasure of working in your district office off and on throughout college and grad school. So.
What's up?
Hi.
How are you?
Very well. And I would just like to end on a quite philosophical tone. You've talked a lot today about everyone needs a voice. Mm-hmm. Everyone needs to be heard. Democracy. And I'm wondering about what people are hearing and asking if our engagement with politics screen to person, not person to person, is at fault? And what, if any, role civics education has going forward to remedy this national disinterest in debate and this culture of hearing what you want to hear?
It's always the last question, right? That's a great one. So, look, I think a big part of any job in public service is trying to communicate with the public, back and forth. And one of the challenges is, yes, trying to meet people where they are, and one way to do that is literally in your pocket. The challenge is, how do I get you to pay attention to something in your pocket? And that's normally 10 seconds, and it better be quick and pithy and funny or whatever else. Democracy isn't always quick and pithy and funny. I think, look, that is, on the whole, where we are, technology has enabled it. It's hard for any politician to fight that. But I will say it's one of the reasons, that in part is one of the reasons why we do office hours. So I represent 34 cities and towns south and west of Boston. Over the course of my term, I will go to every single one of those towns and have, normally at the town hall or public security office, library, a lot of libraries, and just hang a little shingle, and whoever wants to come in and talk about whatever you want to talk about. You guys might be too young for West Wing, some of you. No, great, thank you. They have that big block of cheese day where you can come on in and talk about whatever you want to talk about. Like, we do big block of cheese day, right? There's no cheese. But you come on in and just ask whatever you want to ask. And if it's a personal thing for you and Medicare, great, well, we've got caseworkers there to work on you and Medicare. But if it's a philosophical question about the Kurds or China or education policy or gun violence or whatever, then I'll give you the best answer I can. But part of that, it's just about, yes, it's extremely impactful for me to hear those stories, but part of that we do, even if nobody shows up, and sometimes very few people do, but just to be able to say that we did, so that my constituents hopefully know that This isn't just about some job that you see in Washington and somebody that ends up running around offices and ribbon cuttings, but that I'm making a commitment to you that your voice actually matters and that it's going to play a role in the policy, and I'm going to have to pay. I want to pay attention to it. I will have to pay attention to it. It doesn't mean that we're going to agree on everything or it's going to influence every single vote that I cast. But it is to make the point as best I can that I'm doing my best to actually make good on that promise that you count. Many of my Republican colleagues do the same. And I think one of the challenges we have to get to is recognizing that even in these massively polarized times, if you took the media spin out of some of this, we actually agree on an awful lot more than people think. It's certainly not everything, and not some of the big topics of the day, but an awful lot more of them we do. But it's also on us in it to try to get there. Last thing, because I'm late for my next thing, which is sad, but next thing that I got to do. For all of you in the crowd tonight, I assume almost all of you are going to be able to vote. No. Almost all, huh? Lowering the voter age? I voted for it. There you go. This, for students in the room, this election, you guys are going to decide it. You're going to decide it because you vote, or you're going to decide it because you don't. But this moment that we are in, more than anything, whether you agree with what I said tonight or you disagree with what I said tonight, or take the Senate race out of it, any other race that you're looking at, this country is at a tipping point. And you all have it in your hands to actually send a message to every single other person in the United States and every single other person around the world about what kind of nation we are and what kind of country we will be and what it means to be part of the United States in this moment of a vacuum of world leadership. And that is literally what is in your hands in 13 months. And my God, I hope you take it, and I hope you run with it, and I hope you recognize that, well, it might seem like your one little vote doesn't matter all that much. One little vote plus one little vote plus one little vote matters an awful lot. And this election could not be more critical. Because 5 more years of this, it's awfully hard to come back from, it's one thing to say, and yes, I'll be partisan for a second here, it's one thing to say that, hey, system wasn't working, we tried one way. That didn't work, we came back. It's another thing to say, hey, you know what? Enough people thought this way was right that we did it again. If you agree with him, fine. And if you agree with the policies put forth by this administration, fine, support him. If you believe that our country, our people, our planet deserves a different direction, make that voice heard, because we are counting on you. I'm grateful for you guys being here tonight. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.